While all eyes are on the upcoming Trump-Putin summit taking place in 2 days, if the British don't sabotage it, here's what you might have missed. Flanking President Trump in the Oval Office last Friday, the president of Azerbaijan and the prime minister of Armenia offered to jointly nominate President Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize for his indispensable role in settling the 36-year-long conflict between their two countries.
Can I have a suggestion?
Yes.
So maybe we agree with Prime Minister Pashinyan to send a joint appeal to Nobel Committee to award President Trump with the Nobel Peace Prize, because from the leaders of the countries which were at war for more than 3 decades, having this historic signature here, it really means a lot. This is tangible result of President Trump's leadership, and no one could have achieved that.
Trump deserves the Peace Prize and much more for this peace deal. He is systematically upending the policy known as the clash of civilizations, put forward by the late Samuel P. Huntington. Huntington was another student of Harvard's imperial apologist William Yandell Elliott, along with Kissinger and Brzezinski. Their policies have killed untold millions around the world. But there's even more to it. What if I told you that Huntington was also one of the architects of the Trilateral Commission's assault on the American people, our Constitution, our economy, and our cities, stretching back over 50 years? I'm Susan Kokinda, and back in 1977, when Trilateral Commission puppet President Jimmy Carter was establishing his government, I testified in the Senate against many of his nominees, exposing their membership in Rockefeller's Trilateral Commission. What I'm about to tell you about how Trump is taking on the full spectrum of trilateral, CFR, World Economic Forum policies is not secondhand knowledge. It comes from decades of frontline experience. All of Promethean Action's team members bring similar experiences to the fight. And that's why our newsletter and our videos are so unique. And that's why you should subscribe to our free newsletter and contribute as much as you can to our efforts. We're not funded by billionaires or corporations, just patriots who want to hear the truth. So in this week's update, I'm going to show you how Trump's foreign policy offensive takes the meat axe to Huntington's clash of civilizations policy. How Trump's takeover of Washington, D.C. law enforcement means that finally, someone is serious about undoing the deliberate destruction of our cities, which Huntington had a hand in. And how Trump's manufacturing revolution shatters the very basis for the empire's social, geopolitical, and economic control. So if you look at a number of the conflicts which President Trump has already resolved in his second term, you will find several of them are products of Huntington's so-named clash of civilizations. This includes Kosovo and Serbia, Pakistan and India, and now Armenia and Azerbaijan. Having served in Jimmy Carter's National Security Council, Huntington was the perfect pick for British geopoliticians after the collapse of the Soviet Empire, because they had to come up with a strategy to keep their perpetual war machine going. Huntington published his first version of the Clash of Civilizations in 1993 in the CFR's Foreign Affairs magazine. In that, Huntington claimed that future conflicts will be dominated by contending civilizations, and that Islam is the permanent enemy of Western civilization. He downplays the importance of nation-states and economic development. That's not surprising, because the empire wants to get rid of nation-states and to control economic development through their globalist institutions. Huntington's ideas took hold in the American psyche after the Reichstag fire known as 9/11. The fact that it was British and American intelligence services that were behind the perpetual wars and behind the deliberate fostering of groups like the Muslim Brotherhood, ISIS, and Hamas was kept out of the picture in order to build up Islam is the enemy image. You also weren't supposed to notice that those same intelligence services were overthrowing just about every secular government in the Mideast and replacing them with radical Islamic theocracies. But here's the kicker. It's not as if Huntington is a passionate defender of the values of Western civilization. Look at this quote from the 1997 book version of The Clash of Civilizations. In the emerging world of ethnic conflict and civilizational clash, Western belief in the universality of Western culture suffers three problems. It is false, it is immoral, and it is dangerous. Let that sink in. To Huntington, this clash is not about defending Western civilization because it embodies universal principles. This is just about pitting your team against another in perpetual warfare. That, of course, is what Donald Trump is committed to stopping. And obviously, his efforts to end the Ukraine war are at a crucial turning point. We will see how far the British Empire will try to go in sabotaging this Friday's Alaska summit. The Europeans are right out in the open, desperate to keep themselves and Ukraine in the fight to the last Ukrainian game. And they're making no bones about trying to keep the war going. But this goes beyond political maneuvering. The Russian Ministry of Defense put out a statement yesterday warning of the danger of a false flag event aimed at sabotaging the summit. The Russians warn that a group of foreign journalists are now in a frontline city in the Kharkov region of Ukraine, and that the Ukrainians are planning a false flag strike in that city, attacking densely populated residential quarters or a hospital, and giving the journalists a front row seat to an alleged Russian atrocity. Because the empire is frantic to stop this summit, because they know that a U.S.-Russian partnership could challenge their grip on the world, and they know how close we are to that happening. But this imperial foreign policy has a domestic component that is even more sinister, and Huntington was involved throughout most of the post-war period. More than a decade before he came up with his Clash of Civilizations story, Huntington was tapped directly by the Trilateral Commission as one of 3 authors, along with his European and Japanese counterparts, to produce a report called The Crisis of Democracy, which was released in 1980. This was a further elaboration of an earlier Council on Foreign Relations report, which infamously stated that the controlled disintegration of the world economy was a legitimate objective. When Huntington wrote his section, the U.S. section, of The Crisis of Democracy, controlled disintegration was already well underway. And the premise of the Trilateral Report is that the U.S. has entered a post-industrial society, and, quote, "We have to come to recognize there are potentially desirable limits to economic growth. Or to put it in modern terms, you will own nothing and be happy." So the Trilateral Report addressed the problem that the elites were having of how to manage the population's expectations, i.e., expectations that their lives would improve, given the pesky problem of democracy. They concluded, quote, "There are also potentially desirable limits to the indefinite extension of political democracy." Of course, with most reports and books issued by the elites, this was not just an analysis. It was a blueprint for dealing with the consequences of the post-industrial society and limited growth. Now, if you're getting value out of the way we put this picture together, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. So, the layers of the U.S. population that were hit first and hardest by this controlled disintegration were the urban areas of America. Socially engineered riots, so-called urban renewal, swept through our cities in the 60s and 70s, feeding on the impact of slowing economic growth. The next wave was the Opium Wars, unleashed on our populations by British and American banks, followed on by what my friends on the West Coast call the homeless industrial complex. Throw in Biden's migrant invasion, and cities like Washington, D.C., not to mention London and Paris, have indeed become dangerous and increasingly unlivable. Donald Trump is not only addressing this from the standpoint of law and order, as his Monday emergency declaration regarding Washington, D.C. focuses on, but he has promulgated other executive orders. One focuses on treating drug addicts and not just housing them and giving them the freedom to live in a tent in an alley. Trump's urban policies are bracketed by a full-on assault on the drug cartels and their financial backers. When the elites outlined their controlled disintegration and limits to growth policy, back then they never expected serious opposition to their policies. Instead, they intended to manage by constraining democratic government itself. They concluded that a highly educated, mobilized, and participant society itself might be a greater threat than external threats or internal subversion. Hence their prescriptions to limit democracy. But they did run into opposition to those policies, erupting in full force with the 2016 election of Donald Trump. For the Anglo-American elite, Donald Trump's policies of economic growth and technological progress represent the very essence of what they and all empires have been trying to crush for centuries. So, whether it's Samuel Huntington or Klaus Schwab or George Soros, the core of imperial or oligarchical thinking is the belief that man is no different from the beasts, living in a static or shrinking economy, and that the lower classes need to be managed or manipulated or culled as necessary. Their doctrines of free trade and environmentalism, enforced by central banks and information and psychological warfare, have been the tools to maintain that. The Obama and Biden administrations, along with their counterparts in the UK and Europe, represented the apex of that. So when you hear the empire's mouthpieces talk about how disruptive Trump's tariffs are, or that he is an authoritarian or dictator, here's what they're really saying. He is busting up our imperial control. Trump knows it, and his team know it. Listen to Peter Navarro, Trump's special counsel on trade.
What President Trump is involved in on the trade front is a fundamental restructuring of an international trading environment which is fundamentally opposed to the United States. Every country in the world gets to put higher tariffs on us, impose higher non-tariff barriers, take our jobs and our factories through this more than $1 trillion deficit.
Or Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who spoke about the manufacturing renaissance that will address the affordability crisis and produce very strong real wage gains. Or Vice President J.D. Vance.
And that's, of course, what the tariffs do. And these things go together, right? The tariffs are kind of the stick. The Trump tax cuts are the carrot. We want to reward you for building in America. We want to punish you for building overseas. And again, Jim, that is such a crazy change from where we were in this country for 50 years. My entire life, I've seen factories close down. I've seen good middle-class manufacturing jobs go to Mexico, go to China, go to somewhere else because our politicians rewarded people for building overseas. The president is trying to reward you for building right here at home, and that's what the Trump tax cuts do.
Notice JD's time frame. His whole life, 41 years. He was born into the world of controlled disintegration, and now finally somebody is reversing it. Trump isn't just making peace deals, which do deserve the Nobel Peace Prize. From brokering peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan, to declaring war on the forces destroying our cities, to launching a manufacturing renaissance that will restore American economic sovereignty. It's all connected. Each policy strikes at the heart of the Trilateral Commission's decades-long project of controlled disintegration. If you appreciate this kind of deep analysis and don't want to be kept in the dark about Trump's systematic dismantling of the imperial control structures, subscribe to our channel and support us as much as you can. Tomorrow, Barbara and I will be taking your questions on our live Q&A session. The British Empire and their American collaborators have spent half a century convincing you that decline was inevitable, that we had reached the limits to growth, that civilizational conflict was permanent, and that our cities were beyond saving. Trump is proving them wrong on every front. And that's why they're so desperate to stop him. This is why they will risk everything, including potential false flags, to derail the Alaska summit. The coming days will tell us whether America's constitutional republic can complete this historic reversal, or whether the empire will succeed in dragging us back into their world of perpetual conflict and managed decline. So stay focused, stay mobilized, and thanks for watching.
Please take a moment and subscribe to our free newsletter at prometheanaction.com.